Well, the other day we had Kevin Carius on, the morning man from Sports 1440. Let's go to the afternoon drive. Host Jason Gregor. I'm seeing your numbers, Gregor. Great for business. The Oilers in the Stanley Cup final. Man, it's finally here. How's it felt for you, dude, who's been cheering for this team and then covering it for so long? What's it like?
You know what? It's good for the city. There's no question about it. 18 years. I know Toronto will say, "Hey, man, 18 years is nothing," and it's probably fair. But 18 years since they've been to a Stanley Cup final, obviously haven't won since 1990, and there's a decade of darkness in there where they really weren't competitive. And in the late 90s, they're the plucky team who had no chance with no salary cap. And now the Oilers are good, and they've been good for a few years. Very similar to Florida, like. It's kind of fitting the two teams who have played the most playoff games the last 3 years are going to meet head-to-head in the Stanley Cup final starting on Saturday. But, there's a lot of excitement in Edmonton, as there should be. Like the Oilers are good. Like they're. I know a lot of people have them as the underdog, and I'm not necessarily certain I agree with that, to be honest. I think there's lots of reasons why you can like Edmonton over Florida, and, we can probably get into that.
Well, let's do that, but let's just start with, I'm a one-day-at-a-time guy, as you know, and my partner, Serena, who hosts the Panthers podcast with me, says she's an Oilers fan. She goes, it's great for them to get out of Edmonton because it's chaos up there and open on the road, and that's from an Oiler perspective. For her, as a fan, do you think it's good for the Oilers to be going on the road to open this thing? What do you think?
Not necessarily. Like the player, it's different today, right? Like in 06 when the Oilers won, after they won the first round, like they went out on White Ave and, had a party in a bar, and there's no cell phones, and, people say hello and that's it. Like nowadays you can't go buy beer without some idiot filming it. So, it's just a different world that you live in. So the players they're insulated more. Like they drive under the parkade, they drive their car out, they go home. I'm not sure, like, I'm sure they don't go out to grocery store right now, although I'm sure they don't go to the grocery store very often because the team cooks them all the breakfast and lunch at the rink anyway. So you'd rather start at home because the fans are going to be nuts, right? Now, Edmonton's been a good road team, so they're not intimidated by going on the road, but it is also, an extra 5.5-hour flight to get to Florida. Now, they left today, so I don't think fatigue's going to be a factor at all. But no, if you asked me, like Edmonton's an experience. What are they, the oldest team in the league? So I don't think it would be a disadvantage to start at home for them. They're actually being a better team at home.
Okay, cool. Well, it's just fun talk, right? You got to. Well, how about this? The week of leading up to it, I think it's been great. There's 2 weeks between the conference finals and the Super Bowl in the NFL. It helps with planning. It helps with hype. This hasn't hurt interest this week, I don't think.
No, not at all. Like it's, I'm sure by tomorrow people are like, all right, even the players I talked to, like the Oilers, they went right from Game 7 to Vancouver right into Dallas. So they've definitely appreciated having a few days off earlier in the week. A guy like Evander Kane will benefit. I think Adam Henrique, who's, has an high ankle sprain, that extra time off for him will be a benefit. I think Connor McDavid, a lot of people maybe weren't paying attention, but, Connor McDavid wasn't shooting a lot in Vancouver. He's had a little bit of, I think, an oblique injury that's limited at times to shoot. But if you notice, the last 4 games are out against Dallas. He had 19 shots. He had a total of 18 in the whole series against Vancouver. McDavid, I think, is starting to feel a little bit better, which bodes well for Edmonton.
I'm sure you know and love Sean Simpson. Actually, you guys were on the same network for a long time. Simmer, he felt that there was some fatigue playing on the part of McDavid especially. So, yeah, everybody could use the rest. But I guess Paul Maurice saying the other day, we're as healthy as any team could be. We know the Oilers aren't that. And that'll be a factor in this series. What do you think will decide this series, Jason? Let's boil it down to that.
Yeah, it's a good question. Like, obviously Evander Kane is the guy who's the most banged up. Other than that, I think the Oilers are pretty good. But, Kane, could play a role. He hasn't done much, to be honest, in the postseason. The Oilers are in the Stanley Cup final. I know he's been a little bit banged up for sure. So, we'll see, the Tkachuk-Kane kind of matchup. I don't know if he can neutralize Tkachuk like he did in Calgary in 2022, right? Like, he basically took Tkachuk out of that series. So, but I do think like the Holloway-Kane-Draisaitl matchup against Tkachuk and Bennett should be very good to me. I think it's going to come down to, obviously, who's going to get a few breaks here or there for sure. I think Florida, the one thing that they have learned from last year, you go back and watch the Stanley Cup final run. Florida took 11 penalties in the first 2 games, gave up 4 power play goals, and they were down 2-0, right? Now, they only took 2 power plays in games 4 and 5 and still lost, but by then the series is kind of over, right? Like, it took them a while to, I think, get their composure. I read a lot about, Florida takes a lot of penalties. No, they don't. Not in the playoffs, right? Like, they got Boston off their game so much. The Bruins took 28 penalties in that series. The Panthers only took 16. And then last round, the Rangers only had 15 power plays. So I think Florida's been pretty disciplined, but they're going to have to be really disciplined because they're going up against the best power play in the world, right? And like Dallas was like, hey, we did pretty good for 4 games. They only took six penalties. Then what happened in game 5 and 6? They took 5 penalties and Edmonton scored 4 times, and it was lights out Irene. So, I think the power play obviously is a huge weapon. I don't think you can win without a good power play. I've looked like St. Louis is really the only team in the last decade to have done it. The rest, like Tampa Bay, was dominant. And guess what? Their power play was 30%. So same with Colorado. So I think Edmonton's power play will be huge. And to me, I think the Lundell matchup against Henrique, Rod, could be quite impressive here. Anton Lundell, very quietly, everybody's talking about Barkov, but lead in 5-on-5 scoring, he's been really good.
He's a stud now. I've been watching him he's really good. Like a lot of these guys, Gustav Forsling, nobody knew who he was till now. Yeah. Right? There's a lot of these unheralded guys on the Florida Panthers. And by the way, one thing, they asked me this morning on Fan 960 Calgary about experience, and that's the thing. How much does it matter? Last year in the Stanley Cup final, the Panthers made a lot of mistakes. You're talking about them. Plus missed nets, fan shots, missed checks. They're not that this time around. They're older, they're mature, they're confident. That's something that doesn't get talked about enough, Jason, in my mind.
Yeah, and they also made lots of changes. Like they got 9, what did they sign? 7 free agents in July, and then they made some trades in the offseason. During the season. Now more depth guys like a Poso and others, but so they'll have enough. I think excitement, which is what you want. I think you want the combination of veterans who have been there, but also some guys who are pumped to get there because that's going to bring you up. And, Edmonton has 5 guys who've been to the Cup final. And Matthias Ekholm talked openly about his first trip there. He goes, I think we kind of forgot we had to play. There was so much media and so much other things and everything. We're like, woo! We're here. This is awesome. And he goes, like midway through the second game, it was like we realized we got to play, and by then it was too late. So I think that's his message. Brett Kulak, same thing. And so they got their guys sprinkled around a little bit. Obviously, Corey Perry's the first player in NHL history to play for 5 different teams in the Stanley Cup final, which is pretty impressive. But, let's be honest, right? The one factor is Edmonton has the 2 best players. And historically in sports, if the rest of your team is equal, which is pretty close, the best guys rise to the top. And I think that can Florida slow down McDavid. It's hard, man, because no one's really been able to do it. Look at his playoff numbers. So the rest of Edmonton teams is better. And Edmonton for 3 rounds has shown they're not going to self-destruct. They gave up the fewest high-danger chances in the regular season. They've given up first in the playoffs, 3rd in the regular season. They've been a lot better defensively, Rod. And I think, to me, it comes down to, can Darnell Nurse play like he did in game 4, 5, and 6? Because we know the Oilers' top 5, top pair defense, their top forwards, they're all going to play well because they all have. If Nurse can play like he did in 4, 5, and 6, because he wasn't very good prior to that, well, then Edmonton now, because Nurse can be a difference maker. And I think it's really up to him and Kulak how they play could determine a huge factor in this series.
And you and I always talk about Stuart Skinner, and now it's my guy Bob up against Edmonton. I'm going to say your guy Skinner. And the thing is, last round, Shesterkin versus Bobrovsky. Shesterkin had better numbers by quite a big margin and lost the series. So none of this really matters. It's just fun to talk about because every series is different.
No. Well, right? I think it does matter because, I look at the Rangers. Honestly, the Panthers dominated that series. If we're being realistic, right? And I think a lot of people were surprised at how well Edmonton handled Dallas, especially in the final 3 games. So you've got 2 teams here that did not back their way in. They did not luck their way in. I think they're full marks on both sides. And, I've been reading lots about, Florida this. And I'm like, but Florida hasn't played a team as good as Edmonton. I got an article coming out today. I've crunched all the 5-on-5 numbers, special teams. Florida hasn't played a team like Edmonton, and Edmonton hasn't played a team like Florida. It's even both sides. There's not Edmonton, Dallas was damn good, and so was Vancouver. And, even even LA had some really good 5-on-5 numbers. Now, Edmonton obliterated LA on the power play, right? So, Stuart Skinner, goaltending obviously plays a key role. But I don't know, like Skinner, if they're going to ask him to do what he did in Game 6 every night, they're not going to win. But that was the exception. For the other games, he's been pretty well insulated, and they just need him to make the saves he should make. And I think if he does that, this will be a long series. And it probably comes down, Rod, to who's going to get that lucky bounce at the key time. Because in a close series, lots of times that can be the difference.
Luck, always a big part as well, and nobody knows where that's going to go. Jason, thanks. Enjoy the hockey bet. If you ever need a Florida perspective, you got my number. Enjoy the hockey.
RP, we'll have you on tomorrow, buddy. Yeah, have a good one.
Jason Gregor, Sports 1440, Edmonton.